Okay, so we are continuing basic frontend tools series, and up until now we covered command line, npm. So all of these episodes are leading up to the next episode. That was the case with npm because we are going to use npm today to talk about and show you how gulp works. So first of all, what is gulp? Well, gulp is a task runner, and what that means is you just give it a set of instructions and it runs tasks for you. So I'm sorry, my voice is a bit shoddy because we had a Christmas party at my company, so you know how that goes. Okay, so what is a task runner? Task runner runs tasks, and what kind of tasks we as front-end developers would need for it to run. So we would use it to compile SCSS to normal CSS. We would use it to minify images. We would use it to copy some files around, to get BrowserSync going, and so on. So in this episode, I'm going to show you the basics of gulp, and we are also going to set up our task runner to work for us for our next episode when we will be covering SCSS. So we are going to need a task runner for that because we need to compile SCSS into a normal CSS. If you go to gulp.js.com, you will immediately get installation instructions for gulp. So first of all, you have to install this gulp CLI. So gulp CLI is command line interface for gulp, so we need that installed, and as you can see, it's installing via this -g flag, which is going to install gulp CLI globally on your machine. Of course, since you're installing it globally, you may need to do sudo, so sudo npm install gulp CLI -g. I am not going to do this because I already got this installed. And the next thing you need to do, you need to install gulp. So we are going to install gulp into our project. So first of all, I'm just going to do mkdir, and I'm going to call my directory task runner, and then we are going to cd into task runner. And of course, since we are using npm for this, first of all, we are going to initialize our npm. So npm init. And now it's going to ask us some questions. Of course, we already did all of this in the previous episode. We're just going to leave everything blank. Yes, and that's it. So we have npm installed, npm initialized, and now we can install gulp. So npm install gulp. Okay, now that we installed gulp, as you can see, it added 252 packages to our node modules folder. Now that we installed it, the next thing we are going to do, we are going to create a gulp file.js, as you can see here. So touch gulp file.js, as we know, touch a command makes a new file. Touch gulp file.js, and now we have our gulp file.js in our task runner. So I'm just going to open up all of this in Sublime. Okay, and if we go right here, we have gulp file.js. So how does a gulp file work? I'm just going to make fonts a bit bigger. Okay. So how does this work? So first of all, we have to require gulp. So to do that, you just do var gulp. So gulp is going to be our variable, and it's going to require gulp. Okay, and that's it. So we are requiring gulp. Now, how does task runner work? Let's create a first task. Of course, this is going to be the most basic task, which is going to just say hello world. So you create a gulp task by writing gulp dot task, and then you add it a name. So if you add this name, So you add a name for it, for this task. So this task is going to be called default. Whenever a task is called default, it's going to run when you write just gulp in your command line, but you will see. So function, we create anonymous function for it, and then we write what this task should be doing. So for this first basic example, we are just going to console log hello world out. And that's it. Okay, if I save this right now, remember this task is called default. If I go to my command line and write gulp, it's going to start using gulp.js, starting the default task, and the default task says hello world. And then it says it's finished in 127 microseconds. Okay, so this was our first task. Of course, as I said, you can rename your tasks a bit differently. So you can have a task called hi. Now if I run gulp, it will say that there is no default task, but if I run gulp hi, it's going to start gulp and say hello world. Okay, so now let's create a task that is actually going to be useful for us. And to do that, we are going to use gulp Autoprefixer. So we are going to use Autoprefixer plugin for gulp to auto-prefix our files. And what that means is you can use some CSS 3 syntax in your CSS, and Autoprefixer is automatically going to add vendor prefixes to those CSS commands. So first of all, we have to install Autoprefixer, and if we go to gulp.npm.js.com and find Autoprefixer, you will of course get this install instructions. You can just copy them, paste them in, and install gulp Autoprefixer. Okay, so once that is done, you have to require it. Just like we required gulp, you can require Autoprefixer. And I'm just going to go right here and paste it in. So we are now requiring Autoprefixer, and we are going to create another task. Fortunately, we already have a usage task right here, actually usage example. So I'm just going to paste it in, and we are going to call our task prefix. Okay, and now this is ES6 syntax. We are just going to convert it to ES5 syntax so that you can follow along a bit easier. Function, so you just add function instead of the arrows, and then you add curly braces around all of this code. So I'm not going to go to my src file. So what this is saying gulp.src. So where is the source? Where is your source file? So gulp is going to be looking for this file right here. We don't have it, and we are not going to call it app.css but style.css. Style, and we need to create that file. So I'm just going to create file called style.css, and I'm going to add some CSS commands into it. So display flex, justify content space between, and align items center, and that's it. Okay, save this. And now we have our source file. So our source file is going to be style.css. Okay, next thing, we use this pipe right here. So pipe says, okay, so you got this source, now let's do something else. And as you can see in this example, it says Autoprefixer. So we defined Autoprefixer right here. We autoprefix this with Autoprefixer, but we added some options. So we say we want the last two versions of browsers, and this cascade false I don't know what exactly that means, so I'm going to delete that. And then we do pipe gulp.dest. So we have here this src, and now right here we have gulp.dest, and it's going to put our compiled CSS file, so auto-prefixed CSS file, into this dist folder. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to put semicolon right here, and actually our task should be done. Now we have this file right here, style.css. Remember how it looks. Okay, let's run this task. So gulp prefix, and it says it started the task and now the task is done. So if I take a look at files and folders that I have in this project, you can see that we now have this dist directory, and if I go in it, we have style CSS right here. So this is our style CSS right here, and this is the one the Autoprefixer made. And take a look what's the difference. So we have display webkit box, ms flex box, display flex, and you have all those vendor prefixes in your CSS file. So you would use this file as your actual production file that is going to be shown on the internet. So this is our base file. So as you can see, we just write CSS3 just like we want it, without any vendor prefixes, and then Autoprefixer is automatically going to add those auto prefixes so that this can better work in, well, mostly Internet Explorer. Okay, so now let's create a task that we are actually going to be using in the next episode, and that is going to be, so we want to compile our SCSS files to normal CSS files. Because of course browsers do not understand the CSS files, and I'm not going to go much into it because we are having a special episode dedicated just for SCSS. But now we are just going to create our task. So I'm going to go right here and just paste it in. So I already got this task set up, and let's just run through it. So first of all, we are defining our task, which we are calling Sass, or we can call it SCSS, whatever you want. So this is used for compiling Sass files or SCSS files. So first of all, just like we did with Autoprefixer, we define source. So we are telling gulp, okay, look in the SCSS folder and any folders that are in SCSS folders and find SCSS files. Once you find those files, you do a pipe and you do this Sass. So you do Sass command and add some options to it. One of those options is this output style, and you can output it as an expanded version. So it's not going to be compressed or anything, it's just going to be expanded. And then we are saying on error. So if error happens, if we don't write our code as we should, then Sass is going to add some errors in our console so we can see what actually happened. And then we are doing pipe Autoprefixer. So you see we are using Autoprefixer in this task also. We actually don't even need this task anymore because we are going to be using SCSS files from now on, not normal CSS files. So we don't even need this prefixer task because we are saying, okay, so once you compiled this into a normal CSS file, then auto-prefix it. And I'm saying last two versions, use Safari 5, and I want Internet Explorer from 7 to 9. As you can see, there are many options to Autoprefixer, so you don't have to use just this last two versions. You can use last 5 versions or whatever you want. So whatever your project actually requires. And then we are going to pipe this again, say gulp.destination. So where do we wanna save this SCSS file? to normal CSS. So where do we want to save it? And we are going to save it into this directory. Okay, since we already have it. And that should actually be it. So this is our Sass task. And now we, of course, because this is going to give us an error, if I do gulp right, so Sass is not defined. It's not defined because first of all we didn't install it, and second of all we didn't require it right here. So we have to require gulp Sass. So that's another plugin for gulp. Gulp has many plugins, so this one is for Sass. Sass require gulp Sass. Okay. Of course, if we run this again, now we are also going to get an error because we still didn't install gulp Sass. So cannot find module gulp Sass. So how do we install it? Okay, so now gulp Sass is installed, but if we run it again, we are still going to get errors. Actually, it's not even going to show us an error, but it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything because we didn't create this source folder. So SCSS, and then we are going to put some CSS files in it, SCSS files actually. So let me just create SCSS. So I'm going to call this file style.scss, not normal CSS, but SCSS. Open it up. Let me just close this. And now in SCSS, as I said, I'm not going to get too much into it because in the next episode we are going to be talking exclusively about SCSS, but you can do something like this. So let's say we have a div. We have some div, and now we can write nested code in it. So let's say that div has a in it has a element which has a class of element, and we can do background black, and that's it. Now take a look at this code. So no browser will recognize this code, and this code is going to be pretty much foreign to any of the current browsers. So no browsers can actually read SCSS files. So we need to compile this SCSS file into normal CSS file. And luckily, we already created a task for that. This is our Sass task. So let's try to run it for the, I think, 4th time. Okay, now it says it's finished. And let's take a look at our compiled file. We have this style.css, not SCSS right here. And if I open it up, now you can see we have .div.element. So this is valid CSS code, whereas this is actually not. So now we have our SCSS or Sass task present and created. So this is what we are going to actually be using in the next episode. So as you can see, creating tasks for gulp is not that hard, but let's keep going. So there are a few more things, basic things that we need to know about gulp, and one of those things is watch. So gulp comes with a default task, but well, it's not a default task because you know what default tasks do in gulp, but it comes with a task called watch. So you don't want to write this code right here or right here actually, and go to your console and every time do gulp Sass. So you want to automate that in some way. So we have this watch task which is going to say to gulp, okay, so watch for these files. And when something happens to these files, usually when they are saved, then run a task. So we are going to create a watch task right now. So to do that, we just write gulp task and call it watch. Right, everything like we did before. And now this task is just a bit different. So you're not going to do gulp src, you're going to do gulp watch, because gulp understands this watch command right here, actually method or function. So I'm going to say to it, okay, so watch this directory. Right, so watch SCSS, all the folders in it and all the files that end with SCSS. And while you're watching them, if something changes, then run a task. And that task is going to be this task right here. So Sass tasks. So I'm just going to do this and say Sass. So this is going to run our Sass task every time this is saved, every time our style.scss file is saved. So I'm going to save this, and to make it work you have to run gulp watch, right? So you run gulp watch, and now gulp is going to start, and it says it finished watch after 12 milliseconds, but as you can see, I don't have this this part right here in my console. That means I can't write any commands right now, because this is dedicated now to gulp and gulp is watching. So we don't do anything in our console right now. And if I go, let me just see if I can clear this. Okay, I'm clearing the console, so just so you can see the changes that are happening. And let's add something other here. So let's say display flex and justify content to be space between, and save it. Now when I save this, as you can see, gulp started Sass and finished Sass in 12 milliseconds. And if we go to our dist folder and style.css file, now you can see Autoprefixer did his job, because we said, okay, compile the files and then auto-prefix them. And it added all of this into our CSS. Now we have a valid CSS, and we have Autoprefixer that prefixes our commands, and also everything is done automatically. And this file is these SCSS files are being watched, and when something happens, it's going to run this task on them. So as you can see, gulp watch is pretty useful thing to have installed in your gulp build, because you don't have to go every time into the console and run those commands. So that kind of workflow wouldn't actually be very practical. Okay, so now let's stop our watch task, and to do that you do Control C, and now we are out of the watch task. Also, every time you make a change to gulp, and if you are running watch, you have to get out of it and run it again. So it's not going to pick up those changes until it's restarted. So we have to go out of the watch. And the next thing we are going to be doing is we are actually going to create a browser sync. So we are going to add a browser sync to our gulp file and to our workflow. So what does browser sync do? So browser syncs also watches your files, and then when they're changed, it's going to automatically refresh the browser so that you can see those changes immediately. So this is one more useful thing to have in your workflow. So I'm going to show you how to do that. As you will see, it's actually pretty easy. So I'm just going to go right here. So you go to BrowserSync page, browsersync.io. You can find this BrowserSync plus gulp.js, and then you have some instructions. So of course we have to first install BrowserSync, but not gulp. As you can see, it says install gulp and BrowserSync. Nope. And we don't even need save dev. So we are just going to install BrowserSync. Okay, once this is installed, now we just go right here and we already have an example of how to use it. So first of all, we have to require it. And as you can see, this require is a bit different from the else because it has this create command at the end. So you have to require BrowserSync, require BrowserSync, and then create. So create an instance of BrowserSync. Okay, so we created that. And as you can see in this example, you have this task BrowserSync, but we are going to take this and put it in our watch task. So I didn't copy this very well. Okay, we just put it in our watch task because of course we want BrowserSync to start up while we are watching our files. And it says just the base dir is going to be our root directory, and it's going to, you can define a file right here if you want, but if you don't define a file, it's going to look for index.html file. So we need to create that file first of all. So I'm just going to do, I'm going to create a new file and call it index.html. Okay, now we just add some HTML code in it, add the title of gulp, and maybe in h1 tags we say gulp is awesome. Okay, we save this and now we have this index.html file. Now nothing is going to happen just yet because we still need to say to BrowserSync, now BrowserSync, not gulp, we need to say to BrowserSync, okay, so you also watch for these files, and then when those files are changed, then refresh my browser. So to do that, you would create another watch task, okay, and you would define files that you want BrowserSync to watch for. So one of those files is going to be, so in any subdirectory that we have right here, and any file that ends with HTML. Right? So when we change HTML, we want to reload our browser, and that's it. So we are going to leave it like it is for now. And then we say on change. So when that file is changed, you start BrowserSync reload. Right? So BrowserSync reload. Reload BrowserSync once this HTML file is changed. Okay, so let's test it out. So first of all, what you're going to see when we run gulp watch now, it's going to start BrowserSync and it's automatically going to open up this web page, and it's going to look for index.html file. So gulp watch. And now, as you can see, it started and it automatically opened up my browser, and it says gulp is awesome. Okay, so let's see if it works. So if I go right here into my index.html file, I would say gulp is super awesome and save. And now if I go to this page, as you can see, BrowserSync did this job and it says gulp is super awesome. If I remove this, save it, go right here, as you can see, I'm not refreshing it or anything. It just says it refreshes itself. Okay, so let me just show you this side by side so that it's very, very clear to you. So if I go to my index.html file, do super, save it, as you can see, it automatically saves. And the one thing that annoys me about BrowserSync when you save it is this connected to BrowserSync every time some change is made. So let's just take care of that. So whenever you are making some changes to a gulp file and the watch is running, you have to do Control C to get out of it. and now make those changes and then run watch again. One more thing I don't think I mentioned is when you run gulp watch with BrowserSync, it's going to add you it's going to give you these URLs. So as you can see, you have local and external. So what that means is, as you can see, my page is currently at localhost 3000. So this is where the BrowserSync is working and making those changes. But also, if you are testing your site on mobile devices like mobile phones, you can go with your mobile phone, your iPhone, whatever, to this address. Of course, you have to be on the same network, same Wi-Fi. And whenever some changes are made in your source files, it's automatically going to change those things in your browser and also on this address on your mobile device. So this is one more thing while BrowserSync is very, very awesome. So okay, let's just remove this notify right here, and to do that you would just go right here and add another option of notify to be false. Okay, save it, run gulp again, actually run gulp watch. As you can see, now this is opened up, and as you can see, we don't have this message right here. So if I do something, save it, nothing happens, just our page just refreshes, and that's it. Okay, now we need to do the same thing for the CSS files. So I'm going to go right here and do dist. So our CSS files are in the dist directory, and look at all of the CSS files. So CSS star.css, not SCSS files, because we want to see the changes that CSS file actually makes to our web page. So when I save this, of course I have to exit out, so Control C, exit out of watch, and now I can run this again, so gulp watch. Now this isn't going to work just yet. As you will see, the problem is actually pretty simple, why it's not working. So if I go to my index file, do some changes, okay, let's just remove this text, save it, this works. But if I go to my style SCSS file and change the background of the body to be black, nothing happens. Nothing happens because we still didn't add that file to our index.html file. So nothing on our web page is going to change. So I'm just going to add that file right here. So dist style.css. Okay, save this. And now as you can see, it automatically changes. Not because the CSS file has changed, but because index.html changed, and it's now calling this style.css, which is saying that the body should be black. But now if I go to my style.scss and say that the body should be white, save it, as you can see, it automatically changes the page. You can do something like red, and that's it. And you can do something like h1 should be white, right? As you can see, BrowserSync is pretty useful. And remember, when you are using this right here, it is also automatically going to change on your mobile devices or whatever devices you want your web page to work on. Okay, so this is it for this episode. We covered the basics of gulp. We set up some systems for us to use in the next episode, because we are going to be doing SCSS. We installed BrowserSync, and we are also throughout this series going to go back to gulp and maybe fine-tune our workflow and add some more tasks to it and so on. So this is not the end of gulp. This is just the intro to it, and as I said, throughout the next episode we are probably going to change some of our tasks, add some tasks and so on. So Of course, if you want to ask me questions, you can do that on Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Instagram, whatever. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this channel and the content I put out, you can subscribe to it. And if you want to send some money my way, you can use the Patreon page for that. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.